My wife's journal ended mid-sentence. Then I found the letter. She never sent. The envelope sat in the pocket of her winter coat, the one with the torn lining she kept meaning to fix. I found it 3 weeks after the funeral, on a Tuesday morning when the house felt too quiet and I needed something to do with my hands. The coat still smelled faintly of her perfume, something light and floral she wore every day for 23 years. I'd been moving through her closet methodically, one section at a time, folding things into boxes for donation. The envelope crinkled when my fingers brushed against it. Plain white paper, unsealed, with a name written across the front in her careful script. Not my name. Michael Caron. I stood there holding it, coat sleeve still in my other hand, and felt something shift in my chest. The name meant nothing to me. I turned the envelope over twice, checked the pocket again as if there might be more, some explanation tucked behind the fabric. There was only dust and a loose button. The letter inside was 2 pages folded twice, dated 4 months before she died. I read the first line and stopped breathing. You asked me to keep your secret, and I did, but I need you to understand what it cost. I sat down on the bed. The mattress made its familiar sound, springs settling under sudden weight. Through the window I could see the neighbor's maple losing its last leaves, branches going bare in the November wind. I read the letter twice, then a third time. Each pass made the room feel smaller and colder. By the time I finished, my hands were shaking, and I understood why the journal had stopped mid-sentence. She hadn't been able to finish the story there. She'd tried to finish it here, in words meant for someone else. The journal sat on my nightstand where I'd left it that morning. Blue cloth cover, pages yellowed at the edges from years of her thoughts pressed into them. I'd been reading through it slowly since the funeral, a few entries each night before bed, listening to her voice in my head as I followed the lines. Most of it was ordinary. Observations about the garden, notes about books she wanted to read, small moments she wanted to preserve. Then the final entry, dated the week before she went into the hospital. It ended halfway through a sentence about trust, the ink trailing off as if she'd been interrupted or lost the thread of what she wanted to say. Now I knew why. I set the letter on the nightstand next to the journal and went downstairs. My knees felt uncertain on the steps, each one requiring more attention than usual. In the kitchen, I filled the kettle and set it on the stove, then stood watching the blue flame curl around the metal base while my mind worked through what I'd just read. The name Michael Caron appeared 6 times in those 2 pages. She called him Mike twice, a familiarity that suggested history. She mentioned meetings at the park, phone calls when I was at work, conversations that stretched into hours. She wrote about promises made and broken, about covering for him, about feeling trapped between loyalty and honesty. She never mentioned what the secret was. The kettle began to whistle. I turned off the flame and poured water over a tea bag, watching the color bleed out in dark clouds. My reflection stared back from the kitchen window, an older man with gray stubble and tired eyes. I looked like someone who'd been handed a puzzle with half the pieces missing, trying to figure out the picture from the empty spaces. I took the tea bag upstairs and read the letter again, this time with a pen in hand, underlining phrases that felt important. The park on Tuesdays. Your brother never knew. I kept your name out of it. The money was supposed to help, you said. Each phrase opened another question. I made notes in the margin, trying to map the shape of what she wasn't saying directly. When I finished, I had more questions than I'd started with, and a growing certainty that the man named in this letter had something to do with why my wife spent her last months looking so tired and distant. I thought about the hospital visits, the way she'd seemed relieved when certain visitors didn't show up, how she'd asked me once, near the end, if I believed she'd done her best. I told her yes without hesitation, holding her hand while machines beeped their steady rhythms. She'd smiled, but there was something sad behind it, something I'd attributed to pain or medication. Now I wondered if she'd been thinking about this letter, about words she'd written but never sent, about a secret that sat between us even as she was leaving. The phone book sat in the kitchen drawer where it had lived for a decade, pages softened from use. I flipped to the C section and ran my finger down the column. 3 Carons in the county. No Michael, but an M. Caron on Oakwood Drive with a number listed. I wrote it down on the back of an envelope, then sat looking at those 7 digits for a long time. Calling felt wrong, too direct, too soon. I needed to know more before I made contact, needed to understand what I was walking into. I went back to the journal, and started from the beginning, reading with different eyes now, looking for mentions of Michael or Mike or anyone who might fit the shape of this secret. The early entries were easy and warm, full of plans for the future and observations about our life together. Then, about 18 months ago, the tone shifted. Not dramatically, not all at once, but in small ways. She wrote less about us and more about obligations. The word tired appeared more often. She mentioned phone calls she had to make, errands that took longer than expected, a persistent worry that something wasn't finished. On a page dated 14 months ago, she wrote, "Saw Mike today. He's not handling it well. I told him to talk to someone, but he insists it has to stay private." Some families are like that, I suppose. Secrets become their own kind of currency. The entry continued with other topics, a recipe she wanted to try, a comment about the weather. But that paragraph sat in the middle like a stone in water, rippling outward. Mike. Not handling it well, has to stay private, families. I read it 4 times, then continued forward, finding 3 more mentions over the next 6 months, each one brief, each one carrying the same thread of concern and obligation. In one entry she wrote, "Mike called again. He needs money for the lawyer. I didn't ask questions." In another, "Helped Mike with paperwork today. It felt dishonest. But what choice do I have?" The last mention, 2 months before she got sick, was the longest. "I'm exhausted from carrying this. Mike says it's almost over, that the settlement should come through soon, and then he can handle it himself. I want to believe him. But I keep thinking about what it means that I've been lying to everyone I love for someone else's peace of mind." I closed the journal and sat in the silence. The house settled around me, small creaks and sighs that happened every evening as temperatures dropped. Through the wall I could hear the refrigerator humming, a sound I'd stopped noticing years ago but suddenly seemed loud. I thought about my wife, the woman who'd shared this house with me for more than 2 decades, the person I believed I knew completely. And I thought about the version of her that appeared in these pages, someone burdened by secrets and caught in a loyalty I didn't understand. The next morning I drove to Oakwood Drive. It took 15 minutes from our house, through neighborhoods I recognized but rarely visited. The street was lined with older homes, well-maintained but modest, trees arching overhead to form a tunnel of branches. The Karen house sat back from the road, a 1-story ranch with gray siding and a neat lawn. A sedan sat in the driveway, nothing remarkable about it. I drove past slowly, not stopping, just observing. Curtains drawn in the front windows, a mailbox with the number painted clearly, a child's bike lying in the grass near the porch. I parked 2 blocks away and sat with the engine running, heat blowing through the vents. The steering wheel felt solid under my hands, something real to hold on to while I decided what came next. Knocking on the door felt premature. I didn't know enough yet, didn't know what I was asking about or what response to expect. But I needed to see the place, to make it real in my mind, to connect the name in the letter with an actual location. On the drive home, I stopped at the library. The reference desk was empty, so I used one of the public computers to search for Michael Karen. The name pulled up a handful of results, mostly old phone directories and property records. One link led to a newspaper archive, a brief mention in a legal notice from 18 months ago. The text was short, just a few lines in small print. Karen, Michael J. versus Karen Estate. Summary judgment filed. The date matched the time frame of my wife's journal entries, when her tone had first started shifting. I printed the page and folded it into my pocket, then searched for more context around estate disputes and summary judgments. The results explained that estate cases often involved contested wills, disagreements over inheritance, family members fighting over who got what. I sat back in the hard library chair and felt pieces starting to align. Mike, a brother who never knew, money for a lawyer, paperwork that felt dishonest. My wife had been helping someone fight their own family over an inheritance. But why? What connection did she have to Michael Karen? What would make her risk lying to me, risk carrying that weight for someone else's legal battle? I drove home slowly, taking side streets, thinking through what I knew and what I still needed to learn. At a red light, I pulled out my phone and typed the name into the search bar. Social media results appeared, profile pictures too small to make out clearly. I clicked on one and found a man maybe 50 years old, thin face, dark hair starting to gray. The account was sparse, privacy settings keeping most details hidden. But one photo was public, posted 3 years ago, A family gathering, multiple people standing together outside a house I didn't recognize. I zoomed in on faces looking for anyone familiar, and there, standing to the left side, slightly behind the others, my wife. Younger than she'd been at the end, smiling but not quite meeting the camera, one hand resting on the shoulder of a woman I didn't know. I stared at that image for a long time after the light turned green, until the car behind me honked twice. Then I pulled over, parked on a side street, and looked at it again. The photo was tagged. I clicked through the names: Michael Caron, Sarah Caron, David Caron, Patricia Henning. And there, fifth in the list, my wife's maiden name. Not the name she'd used for the last 23 years, but the one she'd been born with, the one that appeared on our marriage certificate and her passport, but nowhere else in our daily life. Henning. Patricia Henning was my wife's sister. I sat in the car with the engine off, phone screen going dark in my hand while traffic moved past and the afternoon slipped toward evening. My wife had a sister I'd never met, never heard mentioned, never knew existed. In 23 years of marriage, she'd never said the word sister, never brought up siblings, never hinted at family beyond the parents she'd told me were gone. I'd asked early on if she had brothers or sisters. She'd said no, quietly, with a finality that suggested the topic hurt. I hadn't pushed. She'd lied. The realization sat heavy in my chest, a weight that made breathing feel deliberate. I started the car and drove home on autopilot, navigating by muscle memory while my mind worked through implications. If Patricia was her sister, then Michael might be Patricia's husband, the brother, who never knew could be another sibling. The estate dispute made more sense now, a family fighting over inheritance after someone died. My wife had been helping her brother-in-law navigate a legal battle against her own family, keeping it secret from me, carrying the stress of that divided loyalty until it wore her down. But why the secrecy? Why lie about having a sister in the first place? I spent the evening going through boxes I'd packed away after the funeral, looking for anything that might explain the gap. Her personal documents were in a filing cabinet in the basement, organized by category and labeled folders: birth certificate, college transcripts, old tax returns. I found her birth certificate near the bottom of the stack, unfolded it on the workbench under the fluorescent light. Parents' names listed clearly, place of birth, date. Nothing about siblings, but that wasn't unusual. Birth certificates only recorded the individual. In a folder marked miscellaneous, I found older papers, things that predated our marriage. A lease agreement from an apartment she'd rented in her 20s, a car title from a vehicle long since sold, and near the back, a folded program from a funeral service. I opened it carefully, paper brittle with age. The service had been held 30 years ago for someone named Catherine Henning. Age 17. Beloved daughter and sister. A photo showed a teenager with dark hair and a shy smile, features similar enough to my wife's that the relationship was obvious. Sister. Not Patricia. Someone else. Someone who died young. I read the program twice, looking for details. The service had been held in a town 2 hours north, a place my wife had never mentioned. No cause of death listed, just dates and a short poem about memory and loss. I set it down on the workbench and stared at the photo, at this girl who'd been gone for decades, and tried to imagine what it meant. Had my wife lied about siblings because talking about Catherine hurt too much? Or was there more to it, something else buried in that history? And how did Patricia fit into this? Another sister, one who was still alive, one my wife had stayed connected to despite telling me she had no family? I went back upstairs and called the number I'd written down for Emma Caron on Oakwood Drive. It rang 4 times, then went to voicemail. A man's voice, neutral and brief. "You've reached Mike. Leave a message." I hung up without speaking, not ready yet to put words to what I needed to ask. The letter sat on my nightstand, pages slightly crumpled now from repeated reading. I picked it up and read through it one more time, paying attention to the specific language she'd used. Your brother never knew. Not brothers, singular. I kept your name out of it. Out of what? The money was supposed to help, you said. Help with what? Each phrase suggested a larger story, pieces of information my wife had assumed Michael would understand because he'd lived it with her. I needed to talk to him. Not on the phone, not in a message, but face to face, where I could see his reactions and ask follow-up questions. I needed to understand what my wife had been protecting him from, and why that protection had required so many lies. The next morning, I drove back to Oakwood Drive, this time parking directly in front of the Karen house. It was just past 9, early enough that people might still be home, but late enough to be respectful. I walked up the driveway, past the child's bike, and knocked on the front door. 3 firm raps, then I stepped back and waited. The man who answered was the one from the photo, older now, lines deeper around his eyes. He looked at me with polite confusion, the expression of someone trying to place a stranger on their porch. "Can I help you?" he asked. "I'm looking for Michael Karen," I said. "That's me." I held up the letter, still in its envelope, her handwriting visible. "My wife wrote this to you. She died 3 weeks ago. I'd like to know why she never sent it." His face changed. The confusion dropped away, replaced by something sharper, almost fearful. He glanced past me toward the street, checking if anyone else was there, then looked back at the envelope in my hand. "You're her husband," he said quietly. "I am." He stepped aside, holding the door open. "You'd better come in." The house was clean and simply furnished, the kind of space that prioritized function over style. We sat in the living room, me on a couch with worn cushions, him in a chair across from me. A clock ticked on the wall. Somewhere deeper in the house, a washing machine hummed through a cycle. I handed him the letter. He read it slowly, lips moving slightly over certain phrases, and when he finished, he folded it back up and held it in both hands like something fragile. "She helped me," he said. "More than she should have." "With what?" He was quiet for a moment, weighing how much to say. Then he set the letter on the coffee table between us and began. "My father died 2 years ago, left behind a complicated situation. He'd remarried after my mother died, had a second family. When he passed, the will split everything 3 ways: me, my sister Patricia, and the second wife's kids. But the second wife contested it, said my father had promised her everything, that we weren't entitled to any of it. She hired lawyers, froze the accounts, made it impossible for us to access anything until the courts sorted it out." He paused, rubbing his hands together. "I had medical bills. My daughter needed surgery, something insurance only partially covered. I didn't have the cash to pay it up front, and the estate was locked up. Your wife, she and Patricia were close when they were younger. When Patricia told her what was happening, she offered to help. Loaned me money, helped me file paperwork, talked me through the legal process. She said she was glad to do it, that family should help family." "But I'm her family," I said quietly. "Why didn't she tell me?" Michael looked down at his hands. "She said you had enough stress, said you were dealing with your own mother's illness, and didn't need to hear about ours. She made me promise not to contact you, not to let you know she was involved. She wanted to keep it separate." "My mother died 8 years ago." He blinked. "What?" "She had cancer. It was quick, but it's been 8 years since that happened." Understanding dawned slowly across his face. "She told me it was ongoing, that you were spending weekends taking care of her, that it was wearing you down." We sat in silence. The washing machine finished its cycle with a long beep. Outside, a car passed, engine noise rising and falling. "She lied to both of us," I said. Michael nodded. "I'm starting to think so." "Why would she do that?" "I don't know." I leaned back against the couch cushions, feeling the weight of too many pieces that still didn't fit. "Tell me about Patricia." "She's my wife, your wife's younger sister. They lost touch for a while after Catherine died, family stuff I don't fully understand. But they reconnected a few years back, started talking on the phone regularly. Patricia always spoke highly of her, said she was one of the good ones." "Your wife is my wife's sister." "Yes. And Catherine was another sister. The youngest. She died when your wife was in her 20s. Some kind of accident. Patricia doesn't talk about it much." I thought about the funeral program in my basement, the photo of a teenager who died too young. My wife told me she didn't have siblings. Michael looked uncomfortable. "Family's complicated. Maybe she had her reasons. Or maybe she just lied." He didn't argue with that. I stood, suddenly needing to move, to do something with the frustration building in my chest. "I need to talk to Patricia. She's at work, gets home around 6. I'll come back." Michael stood as well, walking me to the door. Before I left, he touched my arm gently, the gesture uncertain but sincere. "Your wife was kind to us," he said. "Whatever else was going on, she helped when we needed it. That counts for something." I nodded, not trusting myself to respond with words, and walked back to my car. The rest of the day passed in a haze of movement and routine. I went to the bank and reviewed our joint accounts, looking for the money my wife had loaned to Michael. I found it easily, a series of transfers over 6 months, each marked as miscellaneous withdrawal, totaling nearly $15,000. Money we'd saved together, money I'd assumed was still sitting safely in savings, gone to cover someone else's crisis. The bank statements showed the dates clearly, each transfer corresponding to journal entries where she'd mentioned helping Mike or dealing with paperwork. At home, I made a list of questions for Patricia. Why had my wife lied about having siblings? What had happened after Catherine died that caused the family to fracture? Why had the reconnection been kept secret from me? What else had my wife been hiding? At 5:30, I drove back to Oakwood Drive and parked in front of the house. A sedan I hadn't seen before sat in the driveway now, next to Michael's car. I walked to the door and knocked. This time a woman answered, mid-40s, with tired eyes and dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. She looked at me with the same polite confusion Michael had shown that morning. "Patricia?" I asked. "Yes?" "I was married to your sister. I'd like to talk to you about her." Her expression shifted immediately, something closing down behind her eyes. She glanced back into the house, then stepped outside, pulling the door mostly shut behind her. "You're him," she said. It wasn't a question. "I am." She folded her arms, a defensive posture. "What do you want?" "I want to know why she lied to me, about you, about Catherine, about a lot of things apparently." Patricia looked away, jaw tight. She had her reasons. That's not good enough. It's going to have to be. We stood there on the porch, the November air cold around us, neither of us willing to give ground. Finally, Patricia sighed and sat down on the porch steps, gesturing for me to do the same. I sat, leaving space between us, and waited. "Catherine died in a car accident," Patricia said quietly. "She was 17. Our father was driving. He'd been drinking. He survived. She didn't. Our mother couldn't forgive him and the family fell apart. She took your wife and me and left. Our father stayed in the house alone, drinking more. Your wife blamed herself, said she should have stopped Catherine from getting in the car, should have called someone. It ate at her for years." "Why would she blame herself?" "Because she knew Dad had been drinking. Catherine didn't. She was just excited about a party they were going to. Your wife let her go, didn't say anything, didn't want to ruin Catherine's night. Then the accident happened and she spent the rest of her life carrying that guilt." I thought about the journal entries, the mentions of obligations and carrying weight. "Why didn't she tell me?" "Because you represented a fresh start, a life where she didn't have to be the person who let her sister die. She told me once that being with you meant she could be someone different, someone who wasn't broken by that night. Telling you would have meant bringing all of that into your life together. We were married for 23 years. That's a long time to keep secrets." Patricia turned to look at me directly. "Do you have secrets from her?" I started to say no, then stopped. Small things, maybe. Worries I'd kept to myself to avoid burdening her. Doubts about work or money that I'd handled quietly. Nothing on the scale of denying siblings existed, but enough to recognize the impulse. "She loved you," Patricia continued. "Really loved you. That's why she helped Mike, helped us, because we're family, and family matters. But she kept it separate because she didn't want to contaminate what you two had with all the mess of her past. Instead, she just lied." Patricia agreed. "And I'm sorry about that, but she's gone now, so I don't know what you want me to do about it." I stood, brushed off my pants, and looked down at her. "I want you to stop pretending this is acceptable. She stole $15,000 from our savings, gave it to your husband, and didn't tell me. That's not protection. That's betrayal." Patricia stood as well, anger flashing in her eyes. "She loaned it, and we're paying it back. Mike's been sending monthly payments to her account for the last 6 months. Check the statements." I hadn't looked that far. Hadn't thought to trace money coming in, only money going out. "He's been paying $50 a week," Patricia continued, It'll take years to cover it all, but we're not thieves. She helped us, and we're honoring that. Some of the anger drained out of me, replaced by exhaustion. I need copies of everything. The loan agreement, the payment schedule, whatever paperwork exists. There isn't any paperwork. It was between family. Then write it up now. I want documentation. Patricia studied me for a long moment, then nodded. I'll have Mike put something together. Good. I walked back to my car, got in, and sat there with the engine running. Through the windshield, I could see Patricia still standing on the porch, arms crossed again, watching me. After a moment, she went back inside and closed the door. The monthly deposits were there in the statements, exactly as Patricia had described. $50 every week for 24 weeks, totaling $1,200 so far. It would take years at that rate to repay the full amount, but the pattern was consistent and documented. My wife had been receiving the payments and hadn't mentioned them, just as she hadn't mentioned making the loans. The silence worked both directions. Over the next week, I received an email from Michael with an attached document laying out the loan terms, repayment schedule, and acknowledgement of debt. It was simple and straightforward, the kind of thing they probably should have created from the beginning. I saved it in 3 places, printed a copy for my files, and sent a brief reply acknowledging receipt. I also went back to the journal and read it one final time, cover to cover, looking for anything I'd missed. The entries painted a picture of a woman trying to balance competing loyalties, struggling with the weight of old guilt and new obligations. She'd written about wanting to help, about feeling responsible for Patricia's happiness because she'd failed Catherine. She'd written about the fear of telling me, of seeing disappointment in my eyes. And in the last complete entry, the one before the sentence that ended mid-thought, she'd written this: I know I should tell him everything. He deserves the truth. But I'm afraid of what the truth will take from us. Some secrets are like walls that hold things up. Pull them down and everything might collapse. I thought about that for a long time, sitting in the bedroom where we'd slept side by side for more than 2 decades, where we'd talked about plans and dreams and ordinary concerns. I thought about the version of her I'd known and the version that appeared in these pages, and I wondered if they were as different as they seemed, or if I'd just been seeing what I wanted to see all along. The weeks passed. Michael continued sending payments. Patricia sent a brief note of condolence that felt sincere if guarded. I boxed up my wife's clothes and took them to donation centers, sorted through her books and keepsakes, and slowly dismantled the physical presence she'd left behind. The journal and the letter stayed on my nightstand, reminders of questions that would never have complete answers. I thought about reaching out to the rest of her family, the father who'd caused so much pain, the relatives I'd never met. But I decided against it. Some doors, once closed, are meant to stay that way. She'd made her choices about what to share and what to protect. I disagreed with those choices, felt betrayed by them, but I couldn't change them now. What I could do was learn from them. I started being more deliberate about honesty in my own life, small things mostly, telling friends when I needed space instead of making excuses, admitting uncertainty instead of pretending confidence, saying no without elaborate justification. The lies my wife told weren't the dramatic kind, the ones involving affairs or crime. They were the quiet lies of omission, the things left unsaid to avoid discomfort or conflict. I recognized that pattern in myself and worked to break it. On the 6-month anniversary of her death, I went to the cemetery where she was buried and sat on the grass near her headstone. The spring weather was mild, trees budding out around the edges of the grounds. I brought the journal and the letter with me, held them in my lap while I talked to her in my head, telling her everything I'd learned and everything I felt about it. I told her I understood the impulse to protect. I told her I wished she'd trusted me enough to share the burden. I told her that love should be strong enough to hold truth, even when truth is uncomfortable. And I told her that I forgave her, not because what she did was acceptable, but because carrying anger forward would only hurt me. Then I went home and put the journal and letter in a box in the basement, filed away with the other documents of her life. I didn't throw them out. They were part of the record, part of the story. But I didn't need to keep reading them, didn't need to revisit the betrayal and confusion they represented. I had learned what I needed to learn. The truth is complicated and people are imperfect, and even the people we love most will disappoint us sometimes. We make choices about what to share and what to keep private, and those choices have consequences we don't always foresee. My wife chose silence and secrecy, and it protected her in some ways while isolating her in others. I chose to forgive her for it, not because she earned that forgiveness, but because I needed to move forward with peace instead of resentment. Some days I think about the life we could have had if she'd been honest from the beginning, if she'd told me about Patricia and Catherine, about the guilt she carried, about the loans and the legal troubles. Maybe it would have brought us closer. Maybe it would have been too much weight for the marriage to bear. I don't know, and I can't know. The choice was taken from me. What I have now is clarity. I know who she was, both the parts she showed me and the parts she kept hidden. I know the shape of her secrets and the reasons behind them. I know that she helped her family when they needed it, that she carried old pain with quiet dignity, and that she loved me enough to want to protect me from all of it. That will have to be enough.